Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ramali Sahara, Content Executive for Healthcare Excellence Through Technology. Welcome to this webinar on e-rostering your clinical workforce in partnership with RotaGeek. Today's webinar will consider the role optimized doctor rostering plays not only in keeping trust compliant and financially efficient, but ultimately in transforming patient care. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Roger Wilson, Independent Workforce Consultant of RJW Associates, who will be chairing today's discussion. Thank you, Roger.
Thanks, Romilly. And good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Just before we start, I just wanted to do a brief introduction, really, before I introduce my fellow panel members. I'm sure everyone will agree that there are a range of pressing challenges facing the NHS currently, and workforce capacity and availability are just two of those challenges, really. As supply is challenging, I think one of the huge considerations we need to give is about how we maximize our existing workforce, how we keep them engaged, motivated, and also adequately rested. It's a challenge with big demands on our services at the present time. So we're going to focus today on a key element of that challenge, your medical staff, and how to roster them effectively. And we're acutely aware that there's a raft of information and guidance that's out at the moment. So we don't want to give you sort of theory or aspiration. We want to understand the practical application of how a particular NHS trust has approached the challenge, what they did, how they did it, and then looking at that wider digital transformation journey across the NHS, really. So we want to focus on the practical and use the session as an interactive case study, really. So we want the session to be as interactive as possible, as we've said. So post your questions, and I'll keep my eye on that during the course of the session. And then we'll have the chance at the end to have a bit of a plenary session where we go through some of the questions that have been asked, and we'll hopefully get some good responses to you all. So thanks for joining us. During the course of the next sort of 30 minutes, we're going to be launching a number of polls. So we'll be doing that once we've done the other introductions, really, from our colleagues. So let's start with introducing our first panel member, which is Chris.
Thanks, Roger. I'm Chris McCulloch. I started life as a doctor, so trained up in Edinburgh, graduated in '98, and on my first day I was handed a bleep and the rota to write. So that's when my rota journey started. In sort of the mid 2000s, I ran a team of docs and sort of healthcare professionals rewriting medical rotas across Scotland. And then in the early 2010s, founded RotaGeek. So I now run RotaGeek, which is an e-rostering platform for health and for industry.
Thanks, Chris. And over to Martin.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Martin Balve. I started my NHS and healthcare journey as a CIO in the NHS, where I implemented both doctor and nurse rostering. I was then Deputy Managing Director at EMIS Health, and these days I run my own consultancy, the Martin Bell Partnership. Huge interest in digital, but also a huge interest in workforce matters as well.
Thanks, Martin. And Mel?
Hi everyone, my name is Melanie Smith. I'm the Assistant Director of Human Resources at Ashford and St Peter's Hospital. Worked in the HR service in the NHS for my whole career, and I've seen many systems come and go, and many ways of trying to manage this workforce come and go. So I'm here today really to share the learning that we've had from our own implementation.
Thank you very much, Mel. And that's our panel for today. So I think we're going to start proceedings by launching our first poll today. We want you to all get involved with. And here we go. So have you been looking at implementing digital transformation in your trust or organisation using these guidelines? So using some of the guidelines that's coming out at the moment. So single choice answers, and we're going to keep that poll open for about 2 minutes. So if you could put your answers in now, that would be really helpful. Okay. So while we wait for those results to come through, we maybe start with the first question, really. So we've touched upon the copious amount of digital transformation guidance that's been published recently when we did our introduction. So let's start there maybe. So have you seen trusts, so the broad question is, have you seen trusts successfully put frameworks in place to help them meet some of these objectives and challenges? And then what do the trusts also make of the various guidelines? But why don't we start with those? Have you seen trusts successfully put frameworks in place to help them meet some of the challenges that they face, really? And let's start with Chris on that one.
Thanks. Yes, we have. And I think there's been a number of things going on, obviously, in the last couple of years. And I think what the frameworks and guidance and things like what good looks like allows NHS organisations to very quickly consider what's important to them when they're looking at digital transformation. That'll be at different stages. I think what to expect from vendors and from suppliers, to quickly assess best practice, what's gone well for organisations that have done it well, and what hasn't gone well. Always good to get the pitfalls. And I think also allowing organisations to think about not only what they need right now, but what the future might look like. So if you're thinking of bringing in a new locum management solution, for example, let's make sure that your vendor is going to be able to integrate into those, and integrations and sort of data flow is really important. And I think what the guidance then allows organisations to do quite quickly is two things: figure out where they are on that journey, because digital transformation is quite broad, and thinking about e-rostering in particular, organisations are at different stages, and they don't necessarily need to bite off everything all at once. It will be a journey. So understanding where they are in relation to other organisations and what the next step looks like is really useful. But that guidance also allows organisations to minimise the bandwidth required to start that journey. And I think particularly in the sort of intra-COVID and hopefully soon post-COVID world, you know, the headspace bandwidth of organizations to undertake sort of intended change is difficult, and therefore the guidance allows us to make that much more straightforward. And we see this outside of health as well. So retail organizations, for example, will use organizations to help them go through that process, because actually selecting a partner for digital transformation is tough. I think as a supplier or vendor like RotaGeek, it gives us insight into what's important for health clients. I think that's really useful. And I think often these guidelines and frameworks have funding alongside them. And we've really seen that drive change, and particularly with the HSSF framework in the last 18 months, the funding really sort of incentivized organizations to move in a much more sort of coordinated and swift way.
Right. Okay, thanks, Chris. That's really helpful. Really, and again, it's from your perspective, from that perspective. So maybe it would be good to move on to, if you're okay to respond to that, Mel, to get your perspective on that from an NHS Trust perspective.
I mean, as Chris mentioned, there's a lot of focus on this, to the point where we were given central funding to go and find a new supplier, but it's really overwhelming to be faced with something that you haven't really had to think about too much before, or you've been muddling through by yourself, or perhaps with neighbouring trusts. We found the kind of process of choosing our vendor difficult, not because anyone was difficult about it, but because this was new to us. This wasn't something that we do every day. And therefore, regardless of which partner people choose to go forward with, engagement on that initial panel of what this system can do, what it can do for us, what do we want it to do, where do we want to get to, and all of those questions that Chris talked about, you have to think about before you get to that point. And I think NHS Trust generally, we're so used to doing everything so quickly and being so responsive to everything, you really even just have to plan that process as much as you possibly can.
Yeah. Okay, that's really, really helpful. And then Martin, I know you're able to give us a more global perspective on your sort of work with the NHS and your own experience as an ICO, really. So how would you, so what would you sort of share with the group today?
I think, I suppose I'd reflect on, so if we look at Sajid Javid, the Secretary of State for England's speech yesterday to the Royal College of Physicians, it's fair to say the government has singularly failed to produce a workforce strategy. Yesterday, he was still talking about it coming out soon. soon seems to have been, feels like the past decade. We saw the other day new numbers from the government talking about doctors and nurses and how allegedly they'd increased. If you actually look back at the King's Fund NHS data, actually there's been a decrease over the past decade. The number of doctors we have in England is about 2.8 to 1,000, whereas in Europe it's about 3.4 to 1,000. So we're under that sort of European average. What that means is twofold. First of all, we need a workforce plan. Secondly, there needs to be more workforce. But as WHO has projected, by 2030, simply for doctors and nurses alone, never mind other clinical groups, globally there'll be an 80 million shortage of those two clinical groups. Yeah. So the fact is that even if we have a workforce plan and we start to get more people coming through as doctors, coming through as nurses, coming through as other clinical groups, non-clinical groups for that matter, there's a need to manage the workforce that exists as well as possible. And in any other world, in any other business, in any other walk of our life, you would use digital to do that. And having an effective rostering and scheduling in place not only enables better optimized scheduling of resources in terms of people, but also hopefully plays actually to them having equal terms and conditions across different clinical areas, helps them with a better work-life balance. Some of the things that have been a real stress, and you can feel it, you see it. We all know people that are on that front line, and the past 2 years especially has been dreadful for all the obvious reasons. And so they're helping improve that situation, as well as managing what will be an ongoing workforce shortage for years to come, if not forever, is absolutely vital.
Okay. Thanks, Martin. Yeah, it's really helpful. Mel, Chris, anything you just want to add to that? No. Okay.
No, I mean, I completely agree with everything Martin said. Is that, you know, day by day as we're reporting, we see staff members dropping off. Midwifery is particularly difficult at this time, but it will move around all of their own staff groups. For years, the training numbers have gone up and down. It's really important that we know where our staff are, what they're doing, who's on holiday. The short notice locum fill for all clinical groups, but especially for doctors, is difficult, complicated, puts patients at risk when we get it wrong, and is expensive. And therefore, it's really important that we can plan that as far in ahead as possible to make sure we've got the right people filling all the gaps. And digital is one way of us being able to do that. It's much more simple to be able to plan those rosters further ahead in advance.
Right, really helpful, really helpful. And actually going back to the poll results there, and looking at what colleagues who've joined us today have said. So 70% we've got who have digital transformation projects happening as we speak. Yes, not, you know, the plans, yes, but not at the moment. We're planning this in the future. That's 70. So 85% of attendees today are we might describe as active in that arena at the moment. But then some interesting. It's often in the minority view, isn't it? Really, where a lot of the interesting stuff is there aren't plans because we've got other priorities, and I guess, you know, we can understand and appreciate what that, you know, range of priorities are. I guess the challenge back around that from a kind of practical perspective is those sorts of short-term economies, and, you know, we need to be spending time to do some of these things now to help maximize our workforce impact over the course of the next 6 months and beyond, really. So that's an interesting sort of challenge and conversation to be had, really. But then again, you know, that sort of 3% saying about don't find it any of it useful and not sure how to start the process, really. So but the vast majority of people are active in that process and are working that forward, really. So okay, so that's really helpful feedback, and we'll be coming back to more polls in a minute. So if we were just closing that down, so let's look at sort of the next 12 months. Let's go into our sort of crystal ball, really. So let's start with Martin on this and sort asking Martin around what digital progress you would expect to see in relation to the NHS workforce agenda in the next few years. I know absolutely the challenges that you've outlined, there's not enough workforce, and there isn't a plan to manage what we have and how we're going to get that future workforce. But in terms of what other sort of developments do you foresee coming into play over the course of the next couple of years in the digital arena?
I think there's partly two questions in there. One is what should happen, and one is what perhaps will happen. So I'll answer it perhaps as what I would like to see happen, first of all. What I would like to see happen is that alongside the kind of targets that have been set out recently in terms of increasing the number of trusts that have got electronic patient records, and the number of social care organisations with electronic care records, that there is a continued drive to get additional funding into the NHS so that all organisations are using the best possible scheduling, rostering tools that they've got across the whole of the NHS. And that needs to take into account, depending on how fast they truly come on board as integrated care systems, that needs to take on board, certainly in England, how that might work across perhaps wider regional areas, and maybe staff moving between hospitals, or between what are now CCG areas or community organisations, but whether that becomes more cross-organisational, difficult enough to manage within an organisation. So perhaps that's not on the horizon. But having those tools that and that comes about, Mel talked about the planning, the leadership, but it can't happen without the money. And we're at a real sort of moment of change here with NHS, the digital parts of NHS E, I, X, D, YMCA, all coming together now under the Transformation Directorate. We've got Ferris and Bolton rather than perhaps Hancock and Gould as the old administration. We need to see, and I hope that digital workforce is very much part of the new national IT plan that is apparently again out soon, hopefully sooner than the workforce plan, but it's due out in the next couple of months. There needs to be a massive section on there, both in terms of the direction of travel around digital workforce, and that's across the board, from skills for staff and rostering, scheduling, general usage of digital systems, but also the funding and the money consistently over a 3 to 5 year horizon to enable organisations to do it. In terms of the caveat and the cynic comment, we are in 2022. I joined the NHS in 2002. In England alone, there are still roughly 25% of organisations that don't have an electronic patient record.
Yeah.
Successive failure in that space, whether blue government, red government, blue tinged with yellow government, failed to deliver in that space. Yes, there is more of it. Query how optimised it is. So there needs to be real commitment. The final thing I'd just say though is, having got this stuff in, and I'm sure Mel is perhaps experiencing this now, getting it in is one thing. That's a big effort. But then optimizing it to make it the best it can be, extending it to get the best benefit and real return on investment by extending it to cleaners and porters and all sorts of other staffing groups. We focus on doctors and nurses because they're hugely important in the size of the workforce and all those sorts of things. But actually, you can get more benefits by extending it across the whole workforce.
And thanks, Martin. Maybe that's something just to sort of just put across to Mel, really, in terms of the plans beyond where you're at currently. What would you say the next 2 years looks like for yourself? What's the kind of, I know it's really difficult in terms of the conflicting pressures, but what would you say your kind of ambition is around, what would you like to see anyway?
Our ambition when we started this was always that we'd be able to see all of our workforce in one place. That's what we wanted.
Right.
And of course, we're only part way through that journey at the moment, but that's what we would want to see. So we're currently looking at our doctors and nurses. We're already seeing pressure from other staff groups to either migrate from the system that they're on, or, you know, come off their Excel spreadsheet and start using RotaGeek. We're trying to not be too fast because of the complications that brings. But 2 years, I can completely see that it would be doable. The benefits of being able to see all of your workforce in one place then starts to open out where you can get that cross-functional working. So where we're seeing particular workforce shortages, for example, junior doctors, where have you got advanced nurse practitioners in the same space who can do some of that work? At the moment, you just can't see that. They're in different places. You don't know who you've got where in some cases. But having all of your team in one place means that clinical teams can make a decision about whether these patients are safe with the team they've got with them and the skills that they've got there, regardless of what profession that they come from. And that's always been our ultimate aim. It was ambitious when we set out. It still feels ambitious, but actually as each day goes past, you can see that it begins to make more sense.
And absolutely, you know, the whole of that, the skill mix and how we deploy different specialties within, you know, our clinical teams is going to be a real challenge over the next couple of years, and broadening the role of AHPs and how we sort of bring nurse associates in, and a whole range of stuff there about how we grow our own workforce is going to be critical, I guess. I know we're about to launch sort of poll 2, but any final thoughts on that question from you, Chris?
Yeah, I think there's some really interesting themes. So Martin's point about the NHS workforce in general, which is we've been below the European average for as long as I've been in the NHS. So since '98, I think we got quite close in the late 2000s, but we've always been below. And so we're in this system where we're under-resourced. We've just gone through the COVID pandemic, which has caused a massive shift in the way people had to work, and that was driven out of necessity, and also, I guess, digital adoption shifted. And we're now coming out of that with all of those pressures and a fatigued workforce, and according to some surveys, large numbers of the NHS workforce that are feeling fatigued, burnt out, need a break, thinking of leaving. We've got to manage all these pressures quite quickly, and I think they're going to be the key things in the next year. But understanding that, you know, it's an organization that's stepped up and delivered, and the organization and teams are just under huge stress. And so then to come in and say, now it's digital transformation, is a really hard ask. So making sure that that's resourced and funded. There are some really straightforward wins, but, you know, we need to be sensible about the steps that we take and how we address that.
And I'll trail a question. We're going to launch poll 2 now, but I'll trail a question from Mel that I want to pick up on, which I found fascinating in terms of what Mel was saying in response to that question, which was around almost a drive from different workforce groups to be able to buy into a digital solution and to actually have their hours rostered differently. Just bear with me 2 seconds while I just go through this challenge. I just need to drop off 1 second, but here's the poll, and I'll be back to you within 1 minute. Thank you.
Perfect. So that's poll 2 open. I think, again, we're going to leave that open for 2 to 3 minutes. So what's been the biggest challenge you faced when rostering your medic workforce? And we've covered some of these. Won't read any.
So Mel, what was your biggest challenge when? What do you think? If you had to pick one challenge, what was yours?
It was resistance on lots of levels. I think the most challenging thing is picking through that resistance that's related to where some perhaps poor practices or poor behaviours or people's habits have kind of now ingrained, and they realise that the system may either highlight that or will mean that other people might want to do the same thing. So it was much more behaviour focused than actually the system itself.
All right, thanks for that. Just wait for the poll close very shortly. So just
Roger's back in the room now. It's just like live television on Good Morning.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. Okay, Okay, that'll close shortly. Okay, so let's pick up on that sort of engagement piece really, and where the drive is from other colleagues to want to have some greater control over the way that their working lives are managed. Do you want to just pick up on a few of the points you said before, Mel, for me?
Sorry. Yeah. So we had we've got a really ambitious plan to be able to see and map our workforce properly using these systems, and that nobody disagrees with any of those things. But when it comes to the practical application of that, the challenges are around the ways that individual teams work. So it's really difficult to find a system that's going to work perfectly for everybody across the whole organisation. So even though the organisation in now is a kind of typical DGH type size, it's not one of the mega trusts with all the different, even in that size of trust, the way that teams currently work means that they need to use this system differently. And that's been one of our main challenges, is making it work for everyone the best it possibly can. And we're still working on that. Because of the way teams work and because of the way they need to work in the future and they want to work now. And some of that, as I mentioned before, is around some practices that perhaps have grown in those teams that really aren't ideal and we should look at be changing anyway. But that's a much bigger cultural shift in a way of working rather than here's a new system, switch it on and see what happens. So there are main challenges really around making it work for everyone. When they switch it on, obviously it looks completely alien, whether they're migrating from another system or whether they've got nothing at the moment. And people get worried and scared, and that's the same with any digital change. For some reason, we're not as scared when we switch on an app on our home phone. We just switch it on and have a go. But when there's a work thing attached to it, people are much more cautious around making sure it's going to do what they want. It has caused quite a lot of anxiety in some places around, are we going to drop something? Is something going to happen because I haven't got it all on my old system or on my bit of paper or whatever I had it on before? Am I going to miss something and something terrible is going to happen? So there needs to be a lot of reassurance and a lot of go and try it, and here's some more training, and get your most confident person playing with it. Don't get your least confident person playing with it. And all of those kind of challenges we've had to work through with each staff group separately and in a different order.
Right, and I guess there's always that. I'm doing some work with an NHS organisation at the moment, moving to new premises, state of the art, purpose built, all of those things. But people still cling to kind of where they work currently, and all the cultural elements that sit at the back of that, and previous practices. So I think that all of those things it's really hard to move people from legacy systems, and people are busy, and it's all of that where we've got to do all of this change while the kind of the vehicle's still moving, really, so there's a big challenge on that. Okay, just to go through the sort of poll 2 really about the biggest challenge you face when rostering your medical workforce specifically. So lack of available staff. We probably, everyone feels that pain, unable to meet individual working demands again, because we'll raise expectations, I guess, won't we, with this in terms of greater control, but then you've got to find that happy medium. Lack of visibility is lower in terms of the response rates there, so that wasn't so much a challenge. Legacy technology that doesn't create rosters properly, and that's something that we've just touched upon. And integrations into ESR and other bank solutions. So again, I'm acutely aware that there are a range of bank solutions out there as well, and how this all sort of fits together and is brought together as a simple solution for people. No digital solution to help us roster. That's an interesting one for colleagues, and none of the above really. So that I know some people haven't started on the journey yet, so that might explain that group. But yeah, I guess the biggest challenge is we're back to that lack of available staff really, and all the more reason to be able to expand our coverage of rostering and how we look at skill mix and how we respond to that. Any panel members got any initial reactions to those poll findings?
Just, I think that the lack of available staff is a really interesting one, as we touched on. In that situation, the teams are working hard under a lot of pressure, and then implementing change in that system is really anxiety provoking. And I think Mel touches on a really important point about that, the human journey. And I guess at RotaGeek, we always, I guess our sort of aim is to make scheduling much more cooperative. How do you manage work-life balance? But in implementing that in any organization, it's always a human element and taking people on that journey. And people naturally have questions. Why are we doing this? What's the point? What data can you see? Like, how is this going to work? And making that as transparent as possible and answering those questions, I think is really important. But I think that is the challenge right now in health, is we know that we don't have enough staff, and the NHS has just come through an incredibly tough period. There are lots of things that we can do really well, but it requires that taking people on that journey, and it's just hard at the moment.
Yeah, appreciate that. Martin, anything you wish to add?
Yeah, I think I'd just add, interestingly, actually, that first question in the poll, it did occur to me that, of course, you could interpret that in two different ways. One's actually just the general availability of staff. The second one is the availability of staff who've got the skill sets to actually implement digital change and understand rostering. So there's perhaps two questions in there, not quite, but irrespective of how you interpret it, it's equally a challenge. I think that issue, Mel touched on it, Chris has touched on it. You know, you can't have 30 questions in a poll, but there's a long list of stuff that goes on down the bottom, you know, from my own experience, you know, involving the unions, changes to standard operating procedures, working practices, 2 wards next to each other, one overstaffed constantly, one understaffed and using agency and bank constantly. Suddenly you see the 2 together, they see each other. What happens? Because people only want to work on one ward and not the other because that's their family, and, you know, all that sort of stuff. So there's some real, you know, real down in the weeds issues that it's very personal, isn't it? You know, it's like desks and cars and parking, and I don't know. It's a very personal issue in terms of how scheduling and how you're rostered impacts you in your life. So yeah, it's a challenge, but, you know, one that we have to take on, one that we have to overcome. You know, as Chris has said, there's been a huge growth in that digital workforce transformation, even during COVID, despite COVID, with all the pressures. That needs to carry on.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Okay, Mel, any final points on that you want to just pick up, or?
I think, you know, some of the challenges relate to the systems and processes that exist in other places in the organisation that you wouldn't necessarily think are connected. And you know, I'm happy to talk through some of our experiences. We've tripped over all sorts of things we didn't realise we were going to trip over in implementing these, because we just didn't think these things were connected. But you just have to think of everything, or be ready to think of everything, and have as many people involved as you possibly can.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll probably come back to that I'm sure that there'll be some questions on that, and that's just a quick reminder to colleagues that who are attending today, that just get you happy, you know, please share any questions you've got for the panel in the chat facility, and we'll pick those up when we get into the Q&A. So, okay, so as we go through the next part, and just before we get into sort of poll 3, really, just Chris, in terms of, again, you know, you've touched upon this, but let's try and get a sense of what life was like as a junior doctor when, and it probably has shaped what you've gone on to do and what you've gone on to be involved with. But what specifically for you was the key area of medical rostering that needed to be addressed, and why you went into to do what you've done, really? So what would you pinpoint there?
I think there are a couple of factors. One is historically how doctors work and how that's changed. We might just talk about that briefly. I think then the effect of COVID on all staff, and we can talk specifically about doctors. And then I think the provision of solutions specifically for doctors. And if we just think back historically, so doctors, when we talk about doctors, just to be clear, they're senior doctors, consultants, and junior doctors. And within junior doctors in training posts and non-training post doctors. Most junior doctors are in training posts. And there's a couple of things that make them an interesting bunch and create some challenges. One is they tend to apply for training posts through deaneries that are consecutive jobs that run over years, but in 4 or 6 month blocks. And they're located in different regions of the UK. So one of the first challenges is that we hear stories of doctors having to choose whether to leave family or whether to take up a training post. So it's a really interesting challenge that's quite specific to doctors. And I think within that, a lot of the doctors, so within a rotation, doctors will then rotate around individual hospitals, and that also creates a problem. Hospitals often don't know in advance, or far enough in advance, which trainees are going to be with them, and that then creates a problem with scheduling, because if I'm a doctor moving to a hospital next week, I might not have visibility of my rota. That might cause problems with childcare, for example. So I think from that point of view, they have these interesting constraints. But I think if we think back about how doctors used to work I feel like an old doctor talking now, but when I started, we used to work 100 hours a week, and my longest shift was 56 hours. And then we've had like a series of 3 different hours of work legislation come in. So it was the New Deal initially in the early 2000s, European Working Time Directive, now the new Junior Doctors Contract. And it's quite rightly limited the hours that doctors can work and set rest requirements, which is much better way of working, much better for patients. But one of the side effects of that was it created the need to template how doctors work. So doctors tend to work a rota, a rotating template, and in fact, it's in junior doctors' contracts now, a generic work template. The advantage of that is, how many hours you're going to work, that you're going to meet your rest requirements, providing you work to those hours. The challenges around flexibility, so it means that they're quite rigid, and therefore swapping shifts becomes quite hard. Annual leave requests become quite hard. Getting annual leave requests with your partner and or family, even harder. And so it was a necessary move to template rotas. But I think we're now in a position that we can address some of those challenges. And the other interesting sort of historic perspective was it drove a move to shift working. And historically, consultants used to work with a team of doctors, and the shift working sort of it broke that social bond. So now you're not aligned to a particular firm or team or group that you work with, and it creates these sort of ownership and loyalty challenges within that team. Now, definitely able to bridge those, but just really interesting challenges. And then obviously the COVID, within COVID, just the challenges around this quite inflexible system, creating much more pressure on docs, has left them feeling fatigued. And the recent surveys show that up to a fifth of doctors are considering taking a break or leaving. And I think the provision of scheduling services to doctors has been quite disparate. There's a couple of dominant players and a lot of smaller players, and I think that gap is closing. I think lots of tech companies are seeing that this is an area where there are lots of quick wins, and some of those quick wins will make a big difference to docs working on the ground. And so that's why we started. And I think the importance of that has just become more clear within COVID, as working patterns needed to change very quickly, and also post-COVID in that recovery phase where we're trying to manage work-life balance and fatigue.
Yeah, really helpful. That's a really helpful insight. And Mel, just listening to Chris's experiences there, do you think that I know there's a myriad of challenges that we've outlined in there, but do you think that with your approach to medic rostering that you're beginning to address some of those issues, and would you be able to pinpoint any of the specifics for us?
I'd be amazed if we managed to tackle the issue of us not working out which junior doctors are turning up before they turn up with the system. Yeah. But ultimately it should be solvable, but it just isn't within our control to solve. It shouldn't be that difficult. But once we've got them, it's a bit early in our implementation to say we've absolutely got this nailed. But what we are beginning to see are people getting into those patterns, being able to look far enough ahead to see when they're working, who they're working with, what they're working. We've managed to introduce things like location viewers in our anaesthetics team, so they can see who they're in theatre next to, should they need somebody more senior than them or with different skills or an extra pair of hands, that before they would have just had to get up and run. Now, all of that was beautifully managed on a piece of paper and a whiteboard before, but it's not sustainable. And getting that over to a digital platform that people can log into on their phone and check will make a massive difference to how people work. You know, our emergency department team and our paediatrics team are looking at now the same technology. They need to know where each other are and not be relying on WhatsApp groups, which is how currently a lot of medical staffing teams get run, of who's where, who's doing what, can you come in, who can cover this shift. Nothing wrong with WhatsApp, it works brilliantly, but it doesn't give the employer any visibility, it only gives those individuals visibility. And so I can see that it will help. I'm not sure we're quite there yet to say that any of them would say it's brilliant, it's solved all my problems, I'm super happy. But what we are doing is seeing that journey begin to bear fruit and begin to be able to see that rostering process make a difference to people. You know, we talked about integration with other systems in one of the polls as well, and integration with your bank and agency provider, whichever platform people want to integrate with, means that you can also pick your extra shifts and they go straight from one platform into the other, so you're not having to make phone calls and do all of those extra things. It makes it much easier for people to manage their own life. And if COVID's taught us anything, it's about giving people back control of when they work, how they work, what time they spend with their families. And because we've rolled it out to nursing teams, we're seeing those benefits even a little bit quicker with our nursing teams than we are with the medical teams at the moment, but they will come.
Yeah, okay. That's really, really helpful. And yeah, there's some huge cultural challenges that sit behind the points and the discussion we've just had, really. Martin, before we go on to poll 3, anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, no, I think Mel and Chris has explained the sort of complexity of the doctors rostering world. You know, times that across all the different organisations in the NHS, all the different staff groups. I think Mel's point is something I touched on earlier, which is getting it in is one thing, making it then really work for you and really realising the benefits. And I know from experience, sometimes realising benefits you didn't even think of. But it takes time that time. So it's not just the 12-month project to get it in, it's the 2 years, 3-year project that follows to keep on getting those benefits. I mean, I think workforce transformation, it's interesting that, you know, Chris touched earlier on the HSSF lot. The workforce lot on HSSF is actually one of the few that's been really used. You know, data shows there's not a lot of activity going through HSSF. Partly it was a repeat, there's no funding, but of course there was some funding for the workforce stuff. And that's why I hope, if I have one call to action from this session, it's that the government and that central funding comes on down in that national strategy and continues to help people like Mel to implement better solutions.
Really helpful. Thanks, Martin. Okay, so should we launch poll 3 now? And okay, so great. So is transforming your e-rostering on the agenda? So yes, it's a priority. We're going to look at it within the next 6 months, so next 12 months, or we're not looking at it at the moment, so no plans to as well. So if you just that'll be up again for another couple of minutes. So just while we do that, Martin, I might stay with you if that's okay. And I suppose looking at, I know Mel's absolutely made the point that it's really early days, and it's actually quite hard to ascertain what you know the big benefits are yet, you know, but we're on a journey to get there, really. What's your view globally in terms of other organisations? Do you think that's something that would be pretty uniform across the piece, really, in terms of?
I think there's a standard approach to, it's true of any transformation project, certainly any digital related, IT related transformation project, that there is a piece where you get it in and working to a level. There is then a phase that follows where you work to optimize it and make it better. as you go through those phases, the benefits become more. So you in the case of workforce scheduling, workforce rostering, you hopefully have happier staff groups. I'm not saying it's going to solve all the problems in the world, but hopefully happier staff groups because they have their needs met. You have better patient care, whether it's because of the rest sessions that Chris referred to, or because of the fact that you can grab an appropriate member of staff from another theatre to help with the situation, like Mel referred to. You can save money. Back to my example of the two walls next to each other, one constantly over-rostered, one under-rostered. You can cut down on bank and agency usage potentially. You can, cope with those holidays, schedule more stuff. There are lots and lots and lots of benefits, many quantitative, but many also qualitative. I mentioned the unions earlier. Actually, one of the things I know many rostering projects have uncovered, and I think Mel alluded to this earlier, you can have 10 different wards and each of them will have a different policy about how they, for example, handle term time only holidays, or, people with kids, people without kids. Mary always wants to work on a Monday, Bob only wants to work on a Friday, and so on and so on. So actually you can end up with some fairly unfair and inequitable working practices across essentially the same staff groups doing the same roles. So there's a real qualitative piece about ensuring the application of HR policies are fairer. But it is a journey, same as anything. It doesn't stop, it carries on. And I hope that Mel and her project and the others on the call that are doing their projects now, I hope you don't get to the point where you get it in and then the finance director says, all right, we've done that. Well, we'll cut the project team and we'll slash the budget. Keeping that level of investment going in to ensure that you get those benefits in the future is really important.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Okay, we're gonna just before we get into the Q&A, we're gonna go to the poll. So poll 3. So again, it's similar to poll 1, I guess, in terms of where people are kind of at and up to. So we've got 47% saying it is a priority, 27% it's going to be something that they're going to be actively looking at in the next 6 months, and then 13% in the next 12 months, but then 13% who are kind of just, it's not really on the radar at this point, really. So that's an interesting. There's some consistency there, isn't there, really, around about how we're approaching that. Okay, so there's a few more questions I've got lined up, but I can see that there's more questions coming in now, and I know there's a couple of colleagues who I just need to navigate back to my original questions. And the first question that came in was from a colleague who asked, where can we access all available e-rostering frameworks? Now, I think I'm going to put that to Chris, unless somebody else wants to sort of answer that or respond to that. But so it's about accessing all of the available. So I guess that what sits behind that question for me is there's a myriad now of providers, and how would we be able to understand all the players in the market to look at what's best for individual organizations and where they're at. So I'll let you kind of respond to that, Chris.
Yeah, it's a good question and quite broad. So I think it goes back to the guidance that's put out centrally. So NHS putting out guidance on what to look for when you're looking at e-rostering solutions and the different levels of those. I think that's a good place to start. There's the HSSF framework that has accredited providers on there. So e-rostering providers that have gone through an assessment that they can deliver for the NHS. So that would be the place to start. And I think the first thing to do is to look at the e-rostering guidance and work out as an organization globally, where are you on that journey and what's the next step? And that also requires you to uncover, and Mel touched on this, and we see this in other organizations, not NHS specific, is you see this sort of disparity across organizations about how rosters are managed. And the question really is, at that stage, at the point of putting in an e-rostering solution, if you don't have it, is that the point at which you're aligning HR policies, or do you want an e-rostering platform to kind of retrofit to that heterogeneous way of doing it and then take people on the journey? It's kind of interesting to think about that in advance.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Now, a question which is directed directly to you, Mel, just about, and it's a question that says, have you the same rostering software across all organisations within the ICS? I think there's a last bit which asks, if not, why not? But I think that's not necessarily I don't think you're necessarily in a position to answer that bit. So, but just again, from your knowledge, is there any consistency across the ICS, or are there other discussions in place to get that level of consistency?
Do you know, I really wish we had done it that way, but we didn't. Each trust went out and procured their own software. What we have seen is a joint bank platform between some of the trusts in the ICS, and that has shown such massive benefits between staff being able to work across trusts, and when they're not scheduled in their own trust, they can hop down the road. We can all see each other's rates, we can see each other's spare shifts, all of those things. I really wish we had rostered together. So if you haven't started that journey yet, I would definitely say it's one of our biggest lessons learned around. It might feel more overwhelming to do it with more trust, but the benefits would be so much bigger if you could pull that off. It would be so much better. I guess going forward, what we would really want to see is, for us and perhaps our nearest neighbours at least, is there anything we can do, even if they are with different software providers, to at least make the information more shareable? The bank platform has really shown that it has huge benefits to both trusts to be able to do that.
Okay, and that's really helpful, because there's another follow-on question, if I may, Mel. I feel like I'm firing questions at you, so apologies for that. But there's a question that I've just seen around rota coordinators, and again, I guess this is one of those real practical solutions, isn't it? Really, or practical elements to it. So the point that's being made is the biggest challenge for completing implementation is a lack of dedicated rota coordinators. So who do you suggest is best placed to take on this role? So maybe it's rather than I'll just put a slight different skew on that to say who do you suggest is in best place, but how has that been managed within Ashford and St. Peter's, really? I'd ask it that way.
I am going to go off topic just very slightly, just to answer the question. I remember my first job in the NHS, I shared an office with the person who was called the Senior Surgical Coordinator, and I think it would have been Chris's equivalent when he talked about being given a bleep and a rota. Yeah. It's not in a doctor's skill set to do this stuff. Their skills lie completely in other areas. Good roster coordinators are absolutely worth their weight in gold, and they don't have to be doctors. They don't have to be clinical at all. They just have to understand the logistics of how these systems work and the impact that it has on people. And that means you can draw those skills from other workforces. Of course, they need to be able to understand these things, but the roster coordinators that we've seen, and some of them have had to pick up bigger areas to manage these digital systems, but because it's now easier, they can do that. These people are the experts in how to do this, and the medical teams and the nursing teams in those cases respect that person, will put all of their communication through them, and they're absolutely the best placed person to do that. I think anyone who's also trying to manage a clinical team clinically and all the stuff that goes with that, whether they're a nursing or a doctor, is very unlikely to have the headspace to be able to do this really, really well, even with a great system. And so I would really recommend a layer of roster coordinators across the whole workforce who really understand rostering, are experts in the system. Some of our biggest challenges have been those clinical team leaders who really struggle to get through the training to become an expert in that system, to be able to whiz their way around it and change things and move people and do those things. And then they have trouble and they find it cumbersome, and then they don't want to use it anymore. So to have your system experts who can just do all of that is, I know it's an investment, but it really is an investor save in these, because your clinical teams can go back to what they should be doing.
No, it's really, really helpful. Yeah, and it's that, and that's, I guess that's where the impact on patient care comes, isn't it? Because it's about minimising the effort that has to go in the back room, really. Okay, that's really helpful. I've got another question from an attendee, and this switches the focus, so you'd be relieved, Mel, that this, you don't think you're in a position to answer this one, but it's around, I'll just ask the first part of the question, which is around how e-rostering can help general practice. So I mean, again, I'll go to Chris in a minute, but we haven't heard from Martin in the Q&A, so maybe we'll start with Martin to see whether he has a perspective on this, and then come across to you, Chris, in a moment, if I may. Martin?
Yeah, I mean, during COVID, we'd see, going back to that HSSF framework and other frameworks do have rostering solutions on them. Obviously, if the HSS framework happens to come with funding, then you should take it. But some of those solutions in there are applicable to primary care. Some slightly different requirements, obviously, in terms of skill mix, workforce mix, the sort of the particular local nature, I suppose, of GPs and how they operate. And some of the solutions, especially I can think of some of the big solutions that are used in some of the acutes, I'd say not applicable for primary care. But certainly things like Chris's RotaGeek and other platforms that are on there can provide the same kind of benefits. Huge at the practice level. Yeah. Again, picking up on Mel's comment, I think if you're looking at doing that in primary care these days, you would be looking at doing it at primary care network level as a minimum, possibly wider, but you'd possibly across the CCG area. But you'd certainly be looking at least at doing it at PCN level rather than just doing it at practice level.
Really helpful. Okay, thanks for that, Martin. Chris, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question because obviously primary care staff work in a slightly different way in a different environment. But I think Martin's right that if you were going to do it, doing it across organizations and in networks is much more helpful because it allows you to schedule potentially across different locations and clusters. Now that might be within GP groups, but also across GP groups. And we see this outside of health where you get much more sort of effective and flexible staffing by working in groups. So you can do that really thoughtfully. I think in addition, what's interesting about primary care is bookings. And again, we see this in health and non-health environments, is that interplay between staff scheduling and bookings. So do you open your bookings up when your staff are available, or do you open up bookings for when your patients want bookings to be available and then staff to that, and then matching up the skill mix? It's a really interesting mathematical challenge that we see in health and non-health environments. And I think just on that, it touched on a point that Mel raised about integrations, making sure that that systems can talk to each other, and to that point of ideally have one scheduling system across multiple locations, or get them to talk. I mean, we can absolutely integrate, and that sharing of data, I think, is becoming really important. You see that drive in some of the guidance coming out centrally, and I think making sure that your providers are able to integrate and content to integrate is a really important thing just to check.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, thanks. And I know a colleague has put a question on, which we're not going to probably have a chance to answer, but we will follow up directly with you, which is around they're sat in the NHS in Wales, and how do they interact with different providers, really? So we can pick that up specifically for that individual.
Yeah, can I just to comment on that? Actually, they should absolutely engage with Digital Health and Care Wales, Digital Health and Care Cymru, much more centrally driven in Wales. They tend to do it once and they do it for the whole of Wales. Seen it with the clinical portal, seen it with nursing e-observations recently. The NHS in England, hugely fragmented, sometimes quite limp guidance from the centre, very little mandation, left up to local organisations and communities. But in Wales, much more coordinated. And I certainly suggest if you're based in Wales, go and have a conversation with the Digital Health and Social Care Wales organisation centrally.
Yeah, there's some very specific challenges in Wales, and the doctor's hours regulations are slightly different as well. So definitely worth doing that.
All right. Last one, last question, because I'm really conscious of everyone's time, and we've got about 2 minutes. So this is directed to Chris, and Chris alone, I guess, because the question is specific to RotaGeek.
There's a curveball last question.
No, I don't know really, but the question is around RotaGeek. What a good day of staffing looks like compared to a bad day. So I suppose it's kind of like when you set out to develop your product, what were the key bits of impact that you would say that you were trying to achieve to make it a good day for people in terms of rostering?
I think there's there's two bits. So one is making sure that the organization has the right people in the right place. And so in the NHS, that means the right people to deliver for patients. So matching that patient demand to staffing, but then overlaying people's work preference, having some flexibility. And I think we've seen that out with health in a much bigger way, working from home, and people now working in a much more hybrid way. But there is this demand to better balance work and life. And that isn't a commitment issue. It's just a reality of life. And it is possible. The tech allows you to do it. And what you then get for that is much better engagement, much lower attrition rates. And we've got data from non-health areas that we show operational efficiency, happier staff, happier patients, happier clients. So that's a good staffing day.
And it's a good place to finish. Thank you so much. Thanks for everyone for attending. Thanks to colleagues on the panel for being so open with responses. That we are going to just email every attendee, so there'll be a link to the session that we can share with colleagues and some other key information to you. But thanks to everyone, and we'll close down at that point. Thank you.